Sex and intimacy are not the same thing. And I'm in this process of rediscovering real intimacy. Like, how deep can I get with my husband? It's so surprising to me that intimacy can still be a struggle after 13 years, after being in the adult entertainment industry. You're like, that should be easy. And it actually makes it really hard.
Welcome to Why Isn't Everyone Doing This? I'm Emily Fletcher, and I believe that bliss is your birthright. That's why I'm calling on my world-class network to uncover the most potent, spine-tingling, even taboo healing modalities, all so you can reclaim your bliss. Let's do this. Hi, sweet friends, and welcome to Why Isn't Everyone Doing This? Today, I am so excited to bring to you a new friend, someone that we just had the beautiful opportunity to do some deep work together just yesterday. And I flew down to be on her podcast. And this morning, I was like, wait, why don't we switch tables? Why don't we switch sides? I'd love to interview you. You're so fascinating. You have such a unique journey. I think there's so much that our listeners could learn about why isn't everyone consciously crafting their relationships? So today I have Candice Horbacz on, who is an amazing mother of 2 children. She is a philanthropist. She is an entrepreneur. She is the host of Chatting with Candice. And she happens to be a former adult entertainment star. She was top 10 of all adult entertainers. And yesterday I had the fortune of working with her and her husband. It was so beautiful to watch their level of love, their level of coherence, their level of trust. And I have so many questions of like, how did you get here? What got inflamed? What was it like? And how did you consciously craft your relationship so that you could be living the lives that you are? So Candice, welcome to the show. I'm so happy to have you.
Thank you for having me. I feel like we have just gotten so deep together so quickly, and I love where this is going.
So I learned about you. You emailed me sort of like from my POV out of the blue. You had seen me on the Aubrey Marcus podcast, and you were like, hey, I'd love to work together. And so I'm curious, like, how did you get there? Like, what inspired you to want to like email a stranger and be like, hey, can you come to my house and do very intimate, vulnerable work with me and my husband? That's a really brave thing to do. And so I'm just curious what inspired that.
I feel like some of that is just my personality. I've always kind of lived on the edges. That's my comfort zone, surprisingly. So if I'm not kind of...
The edge is your comfort zone?
The edge is my comfort
Wow.
zone. So I almost, like, the worst place you could put me is, like, in the middle with everybody else. Like, that to me just makes me feel, like, invisible and inauthentic, and some part of me is being suffocated. So I feel like I breathe when I can separate myself. And it just feels authentic to me. So I make some of these decisions, like getting into adult work, and people are like, how could you possibly? But for me, that felt like the truest thing I could do at the time for myself. So when I emailed you, sexuality is always like this very curious thing of mine, and how we explore it and our stories around it, the healing that can happen with it. Even someone like me who, might seem very progressive when it comes to these, I understand that there's still a lot of hurt that can come from it, even if you think you're making these decisions consciously.
A lot of hurt that can come from what?
From exchanges, like from sexual exchanges, from deciding to film it, from deciding to have it on the internet forever. When you make these decisions, especially at a younger age, you don't understand necessarily all of the effects like that are going to ripple from it. So I knew that there was still some intimacy I had to work on, because those are very different things. Sex and intimacy are not the same thing, and we often conflate them. And I'm in this process of rediscovering real intimacy. Like, how deep can I get with my husband? And it's so surprising to me that intimacy can still be a struggle after 13 years, after being in the adult entertainment industry. You're like, that should be easy. And it actually makes it really hard. It makes it really difficult, especially if you're constantly in this space of performing or just sex, right? Like junk food sex, not spiritual sex.
Ooh, I've never heard of that junk food sex. That's such a fascinating distinction.
It's like, like potato chips are okay now and then, pizza's okay now and then, but you don't want to overindulge. So if you're overindulging in this sexual exchange that there's no real connection or commitment or intimacy, then you can kind of lose your way, and it'll feel foreign when you start entering that space. So I watched your podcast, and I just felt gravitated towards you. It was like, she is doing what she's supposed to be doing. She's so honest. And I think when you see that, like, you can't argue that truth. And how many people are doing the work that you're doing? Almost nobody, if not nobody. And I was like, I just felt like I could learn from you. And luckily I have a husband who is on board. I just like, hey, do you want to do this? We're going to do pleasure practice. And he's like, yeah, I don't know what that is. Sign me up. I'll show up.
It was so funny yesterday when I was like doing the intro and I was like, what do you know? What do you not know? And he was like, nothing. And I was like, sir, you are brave. Just inviting a stranger in, and he played full out.
Yes, he did.
It was really impressive. But truly, the thing I was struck by is that, like, even if I did not know that you had a history of being in the adult entertainment industry, I would have commented on, like, the health and the beauty. Obviously, I just knew you for one day, but you could feel, like, you can feel when there's real trust and transparency, and when partners are working as a team. And it really feels like y'all have created that. And so when I asked you to be on the show, I was like, what is your version of why isn't everyone doing this? And you said, why isn't everyone consciously crafting their relationship? And I imagine that that's something y'all have really had to do because, like, even doing this work, which is pretty mild, like, when I'm doing this work with people, it's more about like them and their dreams, them and their soul. You're sort of in your own energy bubble. You're not really physically interacting with anyone else. And yet it still is triggering sometimes for my boyfriend. And certainly like my family is just like, what are you doing now? You went from meditation to what? and so I'm curious what it has triggered in your relationship. And yeah, what's been like the most challenging part? And were you already in the industry when y'all met?
So we met as I was getting into it.
Okay.
So I started off just webcamming and then slowly moved to just girl film. So I very slowly kind of got into the industry, and he was there the whole time. And the hardest part, like most men don't have an issue with girls and women with women. It's just not a thing that's triggering for them. But once I started having the conversation of wanting to get into like male female scenes, at first it was like a hard stop no. And I don't think I was necessarily ready at the time that I first presented it. So I was like, okay, like I'm not going to argue this one and we'll just put it on the back burner. And then I got presented with an opportunity that kind of like didn't exist, which is like contracts. And to me, that's something that I really wanted.
What's that mean?
Like you're contracted to one company so that you're not a freelance performer. You have
like
a
back
lot
in the day of like the golden age of Hollywood, and like I'm an MGM contracted actor.
Yeah,
okay.
So similar would be like the Vivid girls were really put on a pedestal, and I had an opportunity to be with like this very prestigious company, and I thought that a lot of ego was behind it, if I'm being honest, right? Like I wanted to be a contract girl, and I liked the stability that it offered. I liked having predictable income and not having to hustle so much, and I knew that I had to do it if I wanted to get to the next level of my career. We got to a place, and I mean, this was like a year-long conversation of back and forth, and can we handle it? And neither of us had any examples ahead of us. Like no one that we knew was in any kind of atypical relationship. Everyone was monogamous. It was the, college, married, kids.
Well, that's a question I have. Like, are you outside of the work? Are y'all monogamous?
We say monogamish.
Okay.
So like, it's open for possibilities. No one has taken that opportunity in a very long time. It's just not that season. But the way that we kind of look at where our bumpers are for our rules is we just constantly are checking in, like, hey, how do you feel? And we still have rules for our relationship. And one of the ones that has always been there is, we're each other's first. Like if our foundation's not solid, if we're not solid, it's not even a question if that's a possibility. So it's that we are each other's, it's foundation. We have a family.
Yeah.
So we're not going to like, if we're not in a good space, like add drama and unnecessary weight to that.
So smart. And we can do a whole podcast just on that, monogamy and monogamish. I was in a relationship once where our rule was don't ask, don't tell. And it's like, oh no, Emily, like that's the worst. Like if you're going to open up anything at all, you got to ask everything. You got to tell everything. Because if you don't have that transparency or that solid foundation, then it's like you're outsourcing versus it being supplemental. Right. So I really learned that distinction the hard way. And
it's also a really easy way to not be honest with yourself of how you feel with that. Right. Like you could say, I'm okay being in an open relationship. I'm okay being poly. I'm okay being monogamish. But if you can't tell me about it, well, why can't I tell you about it? Because is it going to cause like this huge fight?
Yeah.
And then are you going to leave me or lock me out or, file for divorce, whatever it is? So if like you can't tell me without there being this explosion or there's an uncertainty if that's gonna happen, then I would say that there needs to be a lot more communication and even just internally with yourself as to like what you want out of the structure of that relationship.
Cool. Okay, so you're just getting into the industry and y'all are together, and then you had a big conversation. You had the opportunity to become contract, but that required male-female.
Right.
Okay. And then what happened?
So we decided we would try it on, and we kind of gave each other full permission to experience it how we were going to experience it. So if he was going to get mad, I had to honor that. If I was going, and at the same time, I couldn't be like punished for doing a scene. So it had to be a healthy conversation. It couldn't be him belittling me or calling me a whore or anything like that. That's not constructive, but he's allowed to be mad. He's allowed to be jealous because of course, right? He's never experienced this with anyone else. So I think we maybe had like a naive optimism of like, we can love conquers all, baby, and we got
We're
this.
different.
Yeah, we're different.
We're so spiritual. We're so evolved. My base human won't get triggered.
Right. I'm a confident woman. I'm not threatened, and I'm a confident man. I'm not threatened. And I started doing the scenes, and surprisingly, I think one of the things that was the hardest for him wasn't necessarily me doing the scenes. It was everyone's opinion of him letting me do the scenes.
Like it felt emasculating for him, or he felt like cuckolded, or he would get feedback from people like, how are you letting your wife do that?
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah. And I mean, he wrestled with that because, I mean, him and I are in agreement that there's no letting me do anything. I'm my own person.
That's right.
And he has no interest in controlling me, which is why he's like, do what you want to do. I think there was a lot of honesty in the fact that he said, I don't know how I'm going to respond, and I can't promise you that, you know, I'm going to be around at the end. I don't want to inhibit you and your path. Like, move forward and do your thing. I want to be, but I just can't promise. And I was like, that's so honest.
So honest.
Right.
Yeah, and refreshing.
And it wasn't an ultimatum.
Yeah, he's taking responsibility and taking care of himself. He's honoring your preferences and your desires for your career. Really, bravo, Eric.
Yeah, it was incredible. So I guess while I was on set, I've always been kind of like an introvert. So I don't like really mingle a lot. That wasn't really, I don't really socialize a ton. Again, like outside, that's where I'm comfortable. And I would see a lot of these women that were in the industry, and they had other than them shooting a typical monogamous relationship. So like the guy on the other end was not allowed to partake in anything extracurricular. And I just saw that falling apart. And
oh, so like you're talking other people in the industry are in relationships and that relationship is monogamous. So their partner is like expected to only be with that person. And if he has interactions physically with anyone else, then it's a deal breaker.
Big problem.
Okay.
And I just found that to be really hypocritical, unfair. I think if the relationship's that unbalanced, it's almost more than likely doomed. Like, so I wanted a level playing field. The justification from some of the women I talked to was that, you know, sex is different when you're getting paid. And well, I'm like, I'm sure your partner probably doesn't see like a huge distinction there. Like, it's still a very intimate and like sexual. It's still sexual
Or
act.
even if you intellectually can distinguish, the body, like the animalistic body, might not be able to distinguish. And the reality is you have to negotiate with all parts, like the head, the heart, and the hoo-ha, because we are holistic humans.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was like, that's not the model I want to do. That doesn't seem fair. And I was the most wildly jealous person. So it was a very big step for me to say, like, the rules are the same for you, and you're allowed to go and play, especially like if I'm shooting for 2 weeks out in California and you're stuck on the East Coast, like, do what you want to do. And I think.
And did you guys have to like approve? Would he have to be like, hey babe, I'm gonna go have this experience? Or would he ever have to like sign off on the people you were shooting with?
No to either. We still had like some rules. So he's an entrepreneur. He has his other businesses. Like, no one that works for you for obvious reasons. We had like rules about like not in the bed, like our bed. Like, we had protected spaces. I was still wildly triggered the first time it happened. I remember being like, whoa. And it gave me perspective to what he was going through. And I think that helped the relationship a lot, because it was a lot harder for me to be selfish, like just lazy and selfish and say, deal with it. You know, my career is taking off and I'm so successful and I love what I'm doing and I. But by leveling the playing field, it really made me come face to face with my own programming and what relationships meant, what a healthy relationship meant. And just because a couple's monogamous, does that mean they're healthy and thriving and happy and that's the best for everybody? And I would say no, because all my relationships prior were monogamous, but they were super controlling, even from my end, and possessive, and there wasn't this trust or safety, and there was a lot of insecurity. And when you meet someone and you're so young, you're in your 20s, and let's say we live to 100 now, does that really make sense? Does one person for the rest of my life make sense? Is that what I want? And it's not to say to all the listeners that you have to be monogamish or open, but it's just like question the standard programming that's there. And like, do you want it, yes or no? Is it going to be sustainable? If you have a fight and honest,
yeah,
even with yourself, so many of us are like, not for me. I'm not that sexual anyways, and one person's enough, and maybe that's true. But also, do you want your relationship to be so fragile that if something happens, whether it's someone cheats or whether it's, maybe he goes out to the bar he's not supposed to go to, or a strip club he's not supposed to go to, or he gambles a little bit more than he said he did, whatever it is, like we all have like our Achilles heel within the relationship. Is it that fragile? Or do I have trust, and does he have trust that he can come to me when he does make a mistake, and then we can like repair that together?
Yeah, that to me is like one of the big benefits of consciously creating a relationship, is that it forces you to create the repair tools. And then we realize that intimacy is not about two people having perfect track records, that actually intimacy can be born and deepened through the repair. And if someone's going into business, like if you and I were going to start a business together and we were co-founders of a company, we wouldn't just be like, oh, let's take this stock contract off the internet and we'll just sign it and make no revisions. Like we would go through and be like, these are my terms for being a business partner with you, and you would go through and have your terms, and we would negotiate them before we would ever sign a contract or go into business together. And that's what a marriage is. That's what relationships are. Certainly when you start a family, you're co-CEOs of this business. And so I love this idea of consciously creating your relationship, because like, why on earth would we accept some stock contract that was created 200 years ago by a church that was trying to control and thought that women were property anyway? Like, why on earth would we allow that to dictate one of the most important romantic, physical, financial, and emotional decisions of our lives?
Sweet friend, if you are loving this conversation and would like to dive deeper into these powerful modalities, I want to invite you to join me at zivameditation.com/whythis. Now there you're going to find free bonus content that we simply could not fit inside of the episodes. I'm talking mini masterclasses with our amazing guests like Aubrey Marcus, Layla Martin, Blue, Vailana, and myself. So come experience the tools that we reveal in the podcast for yourself. Simply head to zivameditation.com/whythis.
So besides like the monogamish piece, like how else have you consciously created your relationship?
I think a lot of it is around being really honest with myself and my temper that I've really am trying to like continuously transcend, and I am eons away from who I was in my 20s and then my teens. And
like when you get triggered, you go to anger?
Yeah, that's my neutral.
Okay. What do you mean that's your neutral?
Well, I should say that was my neutral. Like, it was almost like, you know how I feel like people can kind of like go throughout life operating in like a neutral frequency, like not like neutral, not charged, but like neutral. Like some people are just more in like a peace state. Some people might be in more of like a sad, depressed state. Some people are just hanging out and angry.
Like what's your baseline?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Or like that's like the next gear at least, right? Like that's the first gear that someone will shift into, almost like a habit. So my habitual either like constant state or like the very next gear was anger. It was like that, because that makes me strong. I'm not I'm not going to be sad, because then I'm weak and vulnerable, and that doesn't work for me, especially with my past. So it's like, no, I'm going to be strong and protective and sovereign. So I'm angry. I'm righteously angry.
Yeah, I'm going to protect that vulnerability with my sword and my shield, and I'm going to be the masculine because I can't trust the masculine.
And then there's no room for him. And one of the beautiful things about our relationship is he's never been somebody that just like will bend to me, like just like, okay, have it your way, or I'm so sorry, or what do you need to like. He'll challenge me. So like, is that really how you want to behave right now? Is that how you want to communicate? Like, I'm not, you know what I mean? Like in a loving way, but then I'm like, oh, wait, this isn't good, right? If there's any conflict and I immediately come to him and start tearing him down or make it personal or be vindictive, then that's not creating an open dialogue for a healthy relationship. That's not one that's going to last. So I think trust kind of goes both ways. It's him having trust in me that he can mess up. He doesn't have to be perfect, and that I'm going to have a space for him to come to me when these things happen. And I can't go straight to anger. I have to assume the best out of him, which is one of the best pieces of advice I've ever been given when it comes to relationships. It's before you say, you know, he just got home from like a 10-hour shift and he just went to sleep on the sofa, and I'm going to be like, you lazy piece of blah, blah, blah. I've been here all day with the kids. Instead of automatically blaming him. It's assume the best out of him. Like maybe he's fucking exhausted and he really needs that time, right? And he gives that to me all of the time as well. So I should be giving that to him.
I love that. I just want to underscore that. Like a version of true love, like a version of actively, if you're going to make love a verb, one thing that we can do is give our partners the benefit of the doubt. Like my friend Annie Lala, who's an amazing relationship coach, she says, like, be like your partner's best PR team. That you have like 10 PR agents in your head arguing for their highest good and their best, which I think is a good relationship hack.
Yeah. Because how often do we because we don't want to blame ourselves, and we don't want, it's just easier to outsource that and put it on somebody else and not look at ourselves. So anytime I find myself in the habit of being judgmental or critical, I try as hard as I can, like hit the brakes and then put that positive light on it. And we kind of call it like the red light, green light. So when you're looking back at things that happen, do you want to shine like a green light on it and look at the most optimistic, well-intentioned reasons why X, Y, and Z happened? Or do you want to shine a red light on it and be like blame, guilt, shame, laziness, whatever it is?
Okay, I need this coaching right now, because I have very much been in like massive judgment in my relationship, and it's been a big deal. And I'm aware intellectually that, you know, all judgment is judgment of the self. And I even went to this stupid cave. It wasn't stupid. It was amazing. I like went to a cave for 5 days to feel my feelings. And I went in with the intention of like, let me transmute this judgment with love. Like, let me see where I am judging myself so that I can stop projecting it onto my partner. And like day 4.5, and I am still just like Judge Judy is raging, feeling more righteous, better than. And I was like, oh no, I'm not going to leave this cave like more judgmental than I came in. And then thankfully, I recognized that like this very foundational belief that I had as a child that like I have to hold it all together. If I don't, it'll fall apart. And so when I do that, when I assume that sort of masculine role of holding it all together, then I'm mad. I'm like martyring myself. I'm like, oh, let me be the martyr. And then I'm mad that someone else isn't holding it when I am like stone-fisted the fact that like I have to hold it. And so in the moment, like not everyone's going to go to a cave for 5 days and have this realization. So when you're in that moment and you're triggered and you're going to anger or you're going to judgment, like how do you in the moment go from like red light judgment to green light, like giving them the benefit of the doubt?
So sometimes it's not instantaneous. Like sometimes I just am like, how dare you, blah, 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 or why aren't you X, Y, Z? I thrive with space. So if I can like feel viscerally that I'm like contracting and like I'm getting into that anger state, is I'll just leave for a little bit, and he knows to give me my space, and I will like breathe, try to calm myself down just like through breathing exercises or meditation or just like silence and alone time. And then I look for evidence. So you go internally and you look for evidence, like, is he these things that my monkey mind is telling me, or is he this incredible man that I know him to be? And as you sit there with time, silence, and space, I think that you can find the evidence very easily one way or another. And then it's like easy to identify that voice in your head, whether it's like, so there's this other tool, it's the sage or the saboteur in your mind. So the saboteur is, he's lazy, he'll never make any money, I'm always going to have to provide, his ADD is so annoying, why can't he be present? That's my saboteur. And then if I look for my sage, that sage is highlighting or green lighting all of the beautiful things that he is, which is a very present father, a very present husband, very giving, very loving. And it gives me all of the counter evidence to my monkey mind. So it's just like looking for evidence, like if, and getting yourself out of that emotional space, because there's this idea of you operate in like these waves, right? And if you're at the top of the wave, then it's very easy to see green light. It's very easy to see nothing but good.
Like on the top of an emotional wave, or yeah, like frequency?
You like a frequency, just like a place. Like if you're having a great day or you've had a great week or month or whatever it is, like you're riding this wave. But then at the bottom, when the wave crashes down, all you're going to see is the bottom, because that's where you're hanging out. Your perspective is just different, right? So if it's going to look different from like the peak of a mountain than in the valley. So you just have to recognize, like, where am I? Am I in a place that's low? Because now I know that everything I'm seeing is not accurate. Like I'm so narrow and I'm only seeing the low. So it's just like checking in with all of these different tools and like really being honest with yourself and where you're at. And then it's all about you. Like you said, it's a mirror. It's all about you. So I'm in a low. It's not that he sucks. It's that I'm not in a good place emotionally right now.
Yeah, I love that. There's a line from the Vedas, which is like, we're all always only commenting on our own state of consciousness, right? So like, everything is bad and the world is terrible and the world is stressy. It's like all we're doing is commenting on our own lens through which we are perceiving reality. And conversely, if we can have the level of mastery and use the tools like meditation and breath work and sacred sexuality and get ourselves into these higher frequencies, that will be the lens through which we not only see our relationships, but also reality itself.
And it starts to almost be a self-fulfilling prophecy. At least that's how my experience has been within my own relationship. So it's almost like the more pressure I put on him and the more that I tried to mommy him or be the man in the relationship, like there was just no room for him and there was too much pressure for him to grow and build and be the successful person that I was demanding that he was. But once I let go of that demand, his businesses started to take off. The polarity in our relationship started to get a lot sexier and happier, and I started to feel safe. Like I felt like I could be vulnerable, but I was getting in my own way by creating all of these demands and all of this pressure on him. It's like, who performs that great under pressure? Most people don't. Most people will kind of like default to some kind of shutdown or like stifling. So it's like relieving some of that pressure, which is ultimately on ourselves. It's like, why can't you be so successful? That's my own self-doubt. That's like, I don't know how long I can hold all of this and I'm so fucking tired. So won't someone help me? But it's again, like you're just kind of creating this crazy 8 pattern back and forth.
Thank you so much for sharing your experience. I'm really resonating so much with it. I know we were talking earlier about like this whole generation of, I mean, I'll speak very generally and heteronormatively, but like a whole generation of women who perhaps didn't have like a healthy father figure or masculine, because in that day and age, it was like the man was expected to like work all the time or was traveling and not go to therapy, and that feelings were weak. And so we had like a generation of unavailable emotionally and sometimes physically fathers. So then like we learn not to trust the masculine, but we were also raised in this age of feminism where we're trying to earn equal pay. So we're becoming more masculine or trying to be more like the male. And that has created like a wave of emasculated men, which is like not fun for anyone. Like we want that polarity. We want that eros of going back and forth. So I feel like this is so relevant, and I'm seeing it happen in so many of my circles. And so I really appreciate you like leaning into your femininity and like taking off that burden, right? Of like, I don't want to hold it all anymore. And ultimately I don't have to. And then him rising to the challenge.
And you have to be willing to give it to someone else. That's the tricky part, because he's like, I'm here. I've got these big, strong shoulders. Just give it to me. And I'm like, I can't, because you're going to drop it. I just fucking know you're going to drop it. He's like, I'm not going to drop it. But in my life, in my entire, at the time, 20 something years of life, anytime I gave that to anybody, man or woman, it was dropped. So, a lot of that is like not punishing him for the people of my past and treating him like a new person too.
And like that work takes a lot of reprogramming of the nervous system. And so I'm curious to know, I just want to like rewind a little bit. So like, what was it inspired you to want to go into the adult industry? Like I know you said you live on the edge, but you could have been like a mountain climber or like skydiver, or like there's a lot of edges, but what was it about that inspired you, that drew you to it?
It's always so hard to answer this question. And the one that because I feel like I'm like live figuring this out every time I do a podcast. I'm like, I get a new piece of information and a new perspective. And I feel like the answer to that is a constellation of things, right? The reason that we end up wherever we are is because of nature, nurture, what we were exposed to, culture at the time, our parenting, how many siblings we had, all of these things. And I grew up in a time where like it was the Playboy era. It was Baywatch. It was Pamela Anderson, Carmen Electra, Tara Patrick, all of these powerhouse goddesses that were everywhere. My dad always had like those magazines or was watching Baywatch, and I just like knew that these women, and this is maybe even like kind of sad, but it was like these women were getting his attention. I wasn't getting it. And I saw that as extremely powerful. I saw them as extremely beautiful. And I was like, well, they've figured something out. There's something within, whether it was like their line of work or just an inner essence that they've discovered, like that gravity, like that sexual female power gravity was sucking my dad in and all these other men. And you would see cameras everywhere and crowds of people, and they were getting love for that. And I craved that so badly. And for some reason, that channel just seemed like my channel. Like, I'm not going to go climb a mountain. I'm surprisingly very risk averse. I'm like, this is really high and I don't want to do this. But that seems fine and safe. And it just felt true to me. There's this indescribable pull that I had towards tapping into sexuality and sensuality.
And I know you shared with me that like 90% of your experience was really positive and consensual, and you wanted to be there, but like maybe 10% was not. Is there anything that you want to share about like maybe like your highest high or your lowest low? Like an experience where you're just like, yes, like I am living my dharma. I am like so grateful and so proud of what I'm doing. And then also maybe the converse of, oof, like that was tough and that maybe felt like a violation or whatever your lowest low was.
So my two highest highs, my one was when I won because the contract was a competition and I just knew I was going to win it. I don't know how to explain it. I was like, this is mine. I already got it. And
manifestation at its finest.
Seriously. And you might actually say that this is the case. So the very last challenge was this live orgy scene, and I'd never done one, but I knew everyone that was there and all the guys that were there. I was on my yes list, so I was down wherever it was going to go, and it's live and people are voting and commenting and this whole
thing. It's
happening
live?
Yeah, live streaming orgy.
Woo!
So I end up winning live.
I did Broadway for 10 years and that feels a little stress inducing.
I don't know. I got into a flow state and I didn't see any cameras. I didn't see cameramen, soundmen, lighting. I just saw what was kind of in front of me, and I was alive. I was so alive, and I won. All the votes got tallied in. They hand me this giant check that's like, theatrical. So
like Publishers Clearinghouse.
Yeah.
Great.
And I was like, this is incredible. Like, I knew I was going to win this thing. And the last thing was, I always wanted to be a penthouse pet. Like, that was kind of why I got in. And right before I retired from the industry, I ended up getting penthouse pet for December. It's like the last issue for the year. So it was like my cherry on top. I did it. I'm complete. I can now go on to the next thing.
Oh, what a gift to climb the mountain that feels important to you to climb before you retire. Actually right after I left Broadway, I was on Broadway for 10 years and I left the industry. I'm like training to be a meditation teacher, teaching acting. And I got a call from this woman named Bjorkley, who's the director of a chorus line. And she was like, Shishi. She called me Shishi because I played Sheila. And she was like, I want you to sing at the ballet, because sadly Marvin Hamlish had passed. Marvin Hamlish is one of the few people who've won a PGOT, so Pulitzer, Emmy, Grammy, Oscar, Tony. And he had passed away. He was the lyricist for a chorus line. And his favorite song was At the Ballet, which is a song that I sang. And so I got invited to sing at his memorial service, like basically at his funeral, which was at Juilliard. And I show up for the rehearsal, and I think it's just going to be like a couple hundred like Broadway performers in a church or something. But no, it's like on stage at Juilliard. Mike Nichols is directing, who's a very famous like movie director and theater director. I go on stage, and he's like, Emily, darling, just bring the microphone on with you because we don't know what Liza's going to do. And I was like, Liza Minnelli? And he was like, yes. And I was like, what? Going on after Liza Minnelli? And then we go up in the dressing room and I hear this voice and I was like, who is that? And they're like, oh, that's Aretha's stand-in. And I was like, Aretha Franklin? And they're like, yeah, she doesn't do sound checks. And I was like, cool. And then we're leaving the theater and I see this star and it says Streisand. And I was like, is Barbara fucking Streisand singing this thing? And so that was the last thing I ever did. I was sandwiched between Aretha Franklin and Liza Minnelli. And
Whoa.
I was like, good night, mic drop. Like, I'm never topping that. Like, I gotta go.
Oh my God, incredible.
Yeah, it was so fun. But I do think it gives you this level of closure where it's like, cool, I did the thing. Like, I climbed the mountain, and it frees you up to move on to the next chapter. And so I'm curious to know, like, this new chapter for you. I know that you're an amazing mother of 2 humans. You have this podcast and you're a philanthropist. And so talk to me about this chapter and what it's been like to like move on from the industry and what it's given you, and then also maybe some drawbacks, because I know it's been tough, like living in North Carolina. Like, there's just a lot of conditioning and judgment and shame around obviously sex and sexuality, and certainly even more so porn.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I feel like the way that I look at it is that porn has given me an incredible blessing because of people's judgment. So it forces you to do better. It forces you to work on yourself and do something next. It doesn't allow you to kind of stay there forever. Otherwise, you are forever deplorable and can't come back to civilized society. So it's like if you want a chance at retribution, you have to work on yourself. Where a lot of people can kind of be complacent because there isn't that external pressure. So you could look at it and say society is not accepting. How dare they? My choices are my choices and they don't affect you, so you shouldn't be forever punishing me, which I agree with. You know what I mean? I think I should be allowed to make my choices so long as it's not imposing any like oppression or violence onto someone else and like their sovereignty, as long as it's only my decision. But that's not the way it works. So
your mind can know that, but then your body that wants acceptance and love and to be a part of the tribe, like your body knows something different, which is like, if I get kicked out of this tribe, I might die alone on the Sahara with no food.
Yeah. And I think that I'm revisiting that a lot more now that I'm a parent. I think I was in that illusion for a while where I'm fine. I've got my friends and like my close-knit circle and everyone knows what I do and accepts me for who I am and doesn't judge me in any way. But then you have kids and you're forced into this other ecosystem where you can't, like, there's no choice unless you were to completely homeschool and live in this little bubble. And I don't think that that's what I want for my kids. So it's, if I'm going to now raise other members of society and I now have to deal with other parents. So I'm always waiting for that shoe to drop, and what's that conversation going to be like, and how horrible is it going to be if, and unfortunately probably when, there's a parent that is like, you can't hang out with so-and-so because of his mom, and I have to explain that, and that's going to suck. But that is, you know, hopefully down the road, and I hope that to gain some more tools to be able to handle that appropriately when it happens. But
and have you had any experiences so far of like people in your community here that have sort of, even outside of your kids, been like, oh, we can't associate with them?
Yeah. So my husband's an entrepreneur, like not in the business whatsoever, never has been. His greatest sin is that he fell in love and married me, right? Like that's it, really. And our work is very different, like very, very different. And he's like, every dream he has is a moonshot. Like, he's got this big, beautiful brain. And he was working on some technology at the time, and we had some local competition where they were supposed to be giving away funding. He was supposed to win this funding until they found out who he was married to, and this very who's to be known guy in town, like very old money and old boys club kind of mentality, went around to individuals, some people that were actually supposed to be on the board of my husband's business, and were like, you don't want to be associated with him. This is his wife. It's just bad. Investors aren't going to go into it. He's, giving them the morality pitch. Meanwhile, he comes from big tobacco. So we're going to say, like, who's really causing the most harm on people? But that's like another thing. It's already had a lot of real world implications. But I find it to be a really good filter, because I don't try to operate from a place of judgment or a place of control with other people. I think that there's a whole host of reasons that people do the things that they do, and they are the way that they are. And again, if you're not, it's that whole like non-aggression principle. If you're not violating that, then I really don't have any qualms with you. So if I operate like that, tribe is very important to me, and I want to know that the people on my most inner circle are have the same principles and values as me. So if you're going to be in a place where you're influencing my family and my children, like, we better agree on these pillars. So if you are going to write me off so easily, or you're so riddled with shame that my existence is making you that defensive, then you're just not from my tribe, and that's fine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really beautiful. And I imagine that has been it speaks to you and your state of consciousness and your resilience, and like a forced byproduct of being in this career. And I'm so sorry that that's impacted you already, and I'm quite sure will as in the future as your kids get older. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious to know, like, where would you draw the line? Because like the line between this conditioning and shame and cultural like divorcing of our own divinity from our own sexuality that's inherent inside of all humans, like even monks, right? Even monks to some degree. And because like I'm not in adult entertainment, and even stepping my toes into this water of talking about, you could use your sexual energy to manifest your dreams. You even mentioned the word sexuality or sacred sexuality, and people's walls go up, their defenses go up, their conditioning, their trauma, their abuse, their shame, that comes up big time. Mm-hmm. And so I'm curious to know, and so I'm fighting this fight of like, hey, everyone, like, just you cultivating your own creation energy does not mean that you are doing anything that might go against your morality, your religion, your ideals. And so I'm curious for you, like, where do you find the line between people's just like repression and conditioning around sexuality itself versus like judgment of porn it's as an industry or as an entertainment?
I don't know that you can separate them, honestly, because when you look at the criticisms of porn, like the mass criticisms, like obviously there's some nuance there because we don't really know. It's still the concept of it and the accessibility is so new. So to deny and say that this is the only thing in existence that has no consequence doesn't make sense. There has to be. Everything has a trade-off. So there probably is something happening, right? We don't know what that is. We don't know if there is a long-term consequence, what happens when kids or teens access it. We don't know because unfortunately it's so accessible, and they've tried to do studies on a brain that hasn't had consumed pornography compared to one that's consuming it to like see if there's any neurological differences. But the problem is when someone gets to 18, because obviously you can't conduct this study on a minor, that they've already consumed it. Right. So we don't know.
But I mean, that it feels like even if you couldn't do like total, like, sorry for this term, but like virginal brains, right? Of like someone who's never consumed porn. But even if you were to look at frequency, like sugar or something, like how many times a week are you consuming sugar or alcohol? If it's like once or twice a month versus once every day, like I wonder, could that happen? And have they done those studies past 18?
I think that they have looked at some people that claim to be addicted to pornography, but no neuroscientist is going to call it an actual addiction. It's more of like a compulsion issue. So they don't classify porn or sex as something that's that you can become addicted to, just from a professional standpoint. Now, obviously, you can get into, again, a habitual, like people can have a habitual issue with it where they're watching 8 hours. That's not good. I just lost my train of thought. What was the original question?
Just looking at the differences between like people's shame and programming around sexuality in general, which I think we have a lot of healing to do, versus people's judgment of pornography.
Yeah. So if you look at the main critiques of porn, it's that it's going to lower your testosterone. That's not true. If you look at it and you say that it's degrading to women, that's not true. It's shot for, it's a male product. It's not designed for women. So women that are automatically like the woman is being degraded and victimized, look at gay porn, like male porn. It is shot just as invasive or quote degrading as hetero male female porn. It's just that they've figured out a way to kind of hack the male brain and figure out how can I get them to watch the most, spend the most, what is going to be the most exciting to them and arousing to them. And that's all that it really is. So it's just like, how do I get the most male attention? So if you have a female product, it's shot very differently. And there are some boutique studios that are making pornography for women. And again, shot very different. Like the storyline is huge, romance is huge. So I think like those narratives, obviously there's the religious aspect to it, but if you look at the main critiques, you have to say like, is that statistically sound? Is there any like scientific evidence that is suggesting any of this? And if you actually look at it holistically, the answer is no. So if it's not scientifically based, where is that criticism coming from?
But I'm curious to know, like, how many studies are happening? Like, are people studying it?
Some people are. They have to be individually funded because pretty much even in the scientific community, if you say sex researcher, so one of my friends, Dr. Deborah So, that was what she was doing until like now she kind of is an author and exploring like the podcast space. But getting funding, she says, is almost impossible. You kind of have to go to Canada where they're a little bit more open to it. You cannot get funding in the States. And this other doctor, she's a neuroscientist and also sex researcher, Dr. Nicole Prousey. I think she's operating in California, but almost all of her funding is also private because, again, she's researching sex and porn, and we can't learn about those things, which is crazy because we know the benefits of orgasm. We know the benefits of a healthy sex life, and it does help with brain health. It helps with your metabolism. It helps with your immune system, but we're not studying it. And why is that? So again, if you're like, well, why? If it's not statistically sound, it has to be coming from somewhere else. So where is that? Is that from this lingering repression that we have from religion? And I would have to say yes, because if you look at other countries, it's not there. Like if you go to Europe, pornography is on the TV, like any TV, regular cable after like 10 o'clock. You know, it's not looked at the way they actually have these ads where they'll take really famous porn stars from Europe. And in the one I remember seeing was this porn star couple comes in and they knock on the door and the parents answer and they're like, who are you? And I think they're naked in it, but I'm not sure. And they're like, oh, I'm so-and-so. They say their stage name and they hand them the laptop. They're like, you know what your kid was doing upstairs? And it puts the responsibility back on the parent. Like, porn is for adults, period. So it's over there. It's like, we are not condemning porn. We're saying as a parent, like, have your cybersecurity in place. Like, make sure that you have the apps and the tracking tools and you're not letting this be accessible to children.
So that is something I really would love to talk about because for years now, I've been getting this download that's like Tantra for teens. And I'm like, no, thank you. Please stop it. That sounds like a terrible idea. And yet it won't go away. And I think because so many of our children, and really young, I mean, I don't know the exact stats, but I think it's like 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. Like
single digits, yeah.
Yeah, like kids are consuming porn and this becomes their education ground. And I think that, I mean, and you tell me, but like I don't want my son learning about sexuality from pornography.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah. And
absolutely
so it's like,
not.
That's not its function. That's not its role. And so how do we then like open up the conversation and give parents and families the tools to have these conversations about a really important part of life that can be so sacred, that can be so healing, that is a potent and powerful medicine. And so how do we instill the reverence with our children without the fear? Right?
Ooh, yeah. And the problem is if you try to introduce a product that's for anyone under 18, you're going to automatically get the super religious people that are like, immediately she's a predator. Like, no, like you need to talk to your kids about sex. Like that exists. And if you don't, someone else is going to.
Yeah.
So do you want the tools and material to do it? Do you want someone to create them for you? Do you want a blueprint? Because so many times parents are like, well, there's no blueprint. What do I do? So like someone like you could quite literally make a blueprint, but then you're going to get criticized for that or say that it's inappropriate. So I think it's making content or information that is developmentally appropriate that, I don't know, like we're all allowed to put our own perspective and lens on it. So why do we have to couple it with shame? Why can't you just say there's this thing called consent and this is what it looks like? Yeah. It doesn't have to be verbal. Like learn how to read body cues. Is she pulling away? Is he pulling away? Does she seem like is like enthusiastic? Like these are things to look out for. This is how you don't get an STD, right? This is how you put on a condom. I mean, if you made the content less, I don't know what they're showing nowadays, but I remember like what I saw in school and it was so boring and then so electrified with fear. Yeah. Like I just remember them showing like genitalia that was infected with X, Y, or Z. And they're like, this is what happens. I'm like, oh my God.
Which probably is just it's just traumatizing. Forget about re-traumatizing. It's like just seeing that is traumatizing.
Right.
And then you start to equate like sex with disease, sex with unwanted pregnancy, sex with rape, sex with non-consensual behavior before you're ever even taught that it can be beautiful, that it can be a pathway to the divine, that it can be healing, that it is good for you. So it's like if you were taught that food only caused diabetes and obesity before you ever learned about the nutritional qualities or how good food can make you feel. It's like we need both.
You develop an eating disorder. So what do we develop? We develop a disorder when it comes to our sensuality and our bodies. And I think young boys instinctively, for some reason that and obviously their anatomy is different, so maybe that plays a role into it when they start going through puberty and understanding like turn on, but boys will masturbate and girls don't. Like we don't inherently know that that's available to us, and a lot of the times I think we're told it's not. Like don't you dare, don't even. I know so many women that haven't even seen their parts. Like how? You've had a kid. What do you mean you don't know what it looks like?
So this is so funny. I'm curious about that because I mean, at least like in my circles, like I know that like a lot of them were experimenting with pleasure really, really early. And I've just read Dr. Emily Nagoski's book called Come As You Are. And she has a whole chapter on it's like same parts arranged differently. And she shows like embryos and like babies in utero and how we have like the genitalia is the exact same until like week 14 or something. And then, so it's like,
even like the clitoris starts to elongate that turns into the penis. Like the testes are like similar to the bulbs of the clitoris. So it's like almost same parts, but they just go into different shapes. And I think that as a concept would do a lot of good if it went more mainstream, because we would let go of these ideas that like, oh, well, men are naturally more sexual than women, which is they've proven is not true if women feel safe. That women actually have, that heterosexual women, and we were talking about Sex at Dawn, and they did a study on heterosexual women where they would hook people up to, like, hook their brain up to machines and then show them different types of porn. And like predictably, like straight men were like turned on by straight porn, gay men were turned on by gay male porn, gay women were turned on by gay female porn, but straight women were turned on by all of it, including bonobos having sex. I was like, whoa, this is interesting, right? Because it's like this becomes like the vessel for procreation and like the species trying to propagate and populate the planet. But this idea that women have a lower sex drive, it's like, no, we live in a predatory sexual society where women ultimately do not feel safe. And so that becomes brakes for our sex drive. So Dr. Emily Nagoski talks about this as well in Come As You Are, that we all have accelerators and we all have brakes. And for all of us, if we don't feel safe, that's going to be a brake. So if we're living in a society that is not safe for women to express their sexuality, or if we get slut-shamed for it, then like, of course your turn-on is not going to be as available.
Yeah, and I think that for some reason, at least maybe this is the case with my upbringing and the people that I know growing up, but like our moms didn't teach us about our bodies either. I remember that sex talk was so awkward. She's like, you know that there's different anatomy and what it's for, right? And I was like, yeah, sure, Mom. She's like, okay, just making sure. And that was kind of it. That was the sex talk that we had. We never talked about, I think the first time I masturbated, I was 16. So that's pretty old compared to what a boy's doing. I think
I was like 9. I was pretty young. I remember when I was like 2 or 3, I was like on a coffee table and I was like riding the coffee table, and I was little, like a toddler. And my mom and sister were like, what are you doing, Emily? And I was like, it feels really good. And like, to their credit, I don't think they were shaming me. They were just like, maybe that's better for the bedroom.
Yeah.
So I have a book that I've given my son. One is called No, a first book on consent. And then I just have a book called Where Do Babies Come From, which is because he's going to be a big brother. Like his dad is having a baby with his new girlfriend. And so we're like having that conversation. And there's this amazing book. It's pretty woke where it's like it manages to talk about procreation without mentioning gender. Where it's like some people have uteruses and some people have sperm and you need an egg and a sperm and some bodies. Anyway, it's not talking about the actual act of intercourse, but it's talking about like, it's actually really great. It's called Where Do Babies Come From? But my son is he's 4 and he's like pretty knowledgeable, at least about like, okay, this egg has a story, this sperm has a story, the baby's being housed in this person's uterus. And yet we've not had like a sex talk yet because it feels too early. Like he wouldn't really understand it. But he's like always touching his penis and like always like experimenting with his own body. But I'm curious, when it comes time for your kids to be exposed to both sex and sexuality and having the porn conversation, like how do you anticipate having those conversations, irrespective of your role in it?
So I think I'm in agreement with probably almost everyone when I say that I do not want porn to be the instruction manual for either of my children. And if I have more, it doesn't matter if like they're young boys or young girls. Like that is not a tool for anyone under 18 to learn from, right? And we don't realize it's like watching Fast and the Furious and that's how you're going to learn to drive. That doesn't make sense. That doesn't work. What they don't understand is that consent is obviously happening off camera. So if you see something that looks aggressive, that has already been established that that's okay before the cameras start rolling. You can't really explain that to a younger person. You can't really even explain that to some like adults, honestly. Like they just assume that that's okay and on the table. But I think the consent thing is interesting because my husband and I have some like really open and deep conversations around like our past and especially like previous partners and that kind of thing. And the no thing is interesting. So I always thought that too, like no means no, right? That just seems obvious. But he's like, I've been with so many women that was like a game they would play. And I was like, whoa, that's dangerous. That's so dangerous, especially if you're young and you haven't established the rules of that game.
Or if you don't even know how to find your own boundaries, which I think we often don't.
Yeah. And he's like, so that can be really confusing. And I was like, well, so obviously I think that when you have two young boys, they're going to be more comfortable with dad when it comes to the sex talk. And he's probably going to get into more of like the nitty gritty of the details of that. And I think that's probably his role. But when it comes to consent, I think that this is something that my husband obviously wasn't taught, which is if that's the case and maybe you have someone who doesn't know their own boundaries and they're saying no or they're playing with no as a toy, just don't do it. And
like, don't play that game.
Don't play that game.
Yeah.
You are out. Like, I need a yes. I need your body to say yes. And if you're giving me a verbal no, unless it's established that this is part of the game and we have another word that means stop, just don't engage. Because as a mom of two young boys, I don't want them to get in trouble because there was some kind of miscommunication. Yeah. And I think sometimes when we hear that there's any kind of even like clunky interaction, that it's automatically painted as malicious and violent and with cruel intent. And that's not always the case. We have two young people that are trying to like figure out nonverbal communication in like this really intimate new space. So what some person might perceive as being like, this was a huge violation, is just really like clunkiness. You know what I mean? So establishing that that conversation around, like, if she's not comfortable with her boundaries and she doesn't know what no means, then you need to have that conversation with her about what no means to you. No means stop.
Yeah, that seems so beautiful. And I'm so glad to see like younger generations, people in their 20s and teenagers now, like the word consent is used a lot. I didn't even really hear that word. It was not part of my upbringing. I'm 44 and I didn't really start hearing that in the sex space until like 4 or 5 years ago, honestly. And now it feels like we're introducing it early to children on the playground even. Like, forget about sexual consent. It's like consent around toys or play or homework or whatever.
Yeah, we don't do like, you know, the whole like go give grandma a kiss and you're like, I don't want to, and you force it. We don't do that either.
Yeah, that's amazing. So like, don't make your kid override their own body instincts and then wonder why they're overriding it when they're teenagers. So like these two concepts of, one, enthusiastic consent, that's like, I'm saying a yes, my body's a yes, like this idea that you're waiting for an enthusiastic yes, an enthusiastic consent, and also accelerated consent, which is something that I've thankfully been learning, like, as I've been more adventurous in play spaces, that like, just because someone said, yes, you may touch my hair, does not mean that you can kiss my neck. And so it's like accelerated consent, that anytime you want to accelerate something, that you get consent for that next thing. And I think that if done well and if trained into a culture, can be really sexy even. And there's ways to do it that's not like, may I now touch your elbow, and like feel nerdy.
See, and that's where it's going, unfortunately. I talk to a lot of guys in college, and whether it's, you know, extended family members and that, and they just don't date because they're so terrified that they're going to, you know, get in trouble because they didn't ask every step of the way, or that they held, you know, a hand the wrong way. Like, it's gotten to like this very extreme overcorrection, I feel like. And I don't, like, I personally, even back when I was younger and like in dating, I wouldn't want to have to be like, is this okay? Can we check this off? I didn't say yes. I think you have to learn how to read someone's energy in their body, and we're so out of touch with each other. We spend so much of our time on our devices that we're not connecting, and we're almost like developing. It's in this one book by Brett Weinstein, and it's like showing up as kind of like a symptom of autism. Not that you're developing autism or anything like that, but like, you know how they think that there's like a mirror neuron abnormality almost, where you can't read empathy, like body language and facial expressions are very hard for most people on the spectrum. That kind of shows up with people that have like an addiction or too much time on screens and devices, so that you stop understanding nonverbal communication.
Wow.
So if that's happening at a large scale, like, how do we cultivate that? That way we can have these really present and passionate exchanges with someone without having like a contract and, right, can I touch your elbow? Well, hopefully at this point within the procedure, like, you trust me, I trust you, and I can very much tell when you start to back away or that you're uncomfortable, and then I can pull away.
So I think this goes back to our original theme of like, why isn't everyone consciously creating their relationships
And it's like if you've had that conversation beforehand of like, these are my desires, these are my boundaries, this is what I'm comfortable with, then you're creating a container where both people can feel safe inside of that. And so just to close out, like, you know, we've talked about like the pros of consciously creating. So why do you think more people aren't consciously creating their relationships?
It's very painful. It's hard. It hurts, right? It's so much easier to just slap on a set of presets onto a relationship or onto a person and say, this is just what we're going to do. It's easier. I don't have to understand why I feel jealous. I don't have to understand why I just immediately go to rage. I don't understand why I feel like I have a sense of ownership or possessiveness over you, or why I think love is only conditional. It's only on the condition that you are faithful to me and that you make $100,000 a year and that you only work 35 because I need me time. Like we throw on so many conditions and then argue why we don't have unconditional love. So it's so much easier to just say, oh, I love you unconditionally, but, and then you have to do all of these things.
Here's my set of preset contract conditions.
Right. And I don't want to look at me and I don't want to have to do the work because it takes a long time. I mean, it was years of us back and forth and tears and almost like leaving each other, honestly, because it was so difficult. So it's not easy. And I think that's why. But I think most exciting and beautiful things are on the other side of difficult.
Difficult conversations. Yeah. And that feels like if you have tools to let the repair create deeper intimacy, then yes, it might be hard, but both of you are going to learn and grow along the way. So before we wrap, I know that you just recently graduated or graduating from Ziva Online.
Yes.
And I'd love to hear like what's been your experience learning to meditate and how's it changed your relationship with stress? What's that look like for you?
So I have tried so many of the apps. I have a husband that meditates very frequently and is always, trying to nudge me and make me have some kind of daily practice. I've never been able to do it. I always felt like I can't stop my thoughts, so I must just really suck at this thing called meditating. And I came across your course, and it just felt like the perfect time for me to sign up. I knew you were going to come in, and I wanted to be prepared. I think it was day 1 or day 2 that I was doing the meditation practice. And you introduced this idea of it's okay to be sloppy, which I just really loved. I'm like, okay, I don't have to have my special chair and I don't have to be fully erect and I don't have to eliminate all of my thoughts. I'm allowed to get sloppy, slouchy, relaxed, and that's okay. That's just another way to meditate. So I'm only like a couple minutes in and I'm sitting in this chair and I just almost like clonk out. And I was like, I was not asleep. I was fully in my body, but I was just that relaxed. Yeah. And I was like, holy cow, this is day 2. What's going to happen? What's going to happen when I graduate? So it's made me a lot more present, a lot less reactive. And I think the whole goal is to not identify with your thoughts. And I think that this can make you an observer of your thoughts. Like, okay, this is a thought, but that's not me. This is a thought, that's not me. This is a feeling, that's not me. And it helps you when you're raising 2 small kids, right? And you're super busy. Like that tantrum's not about you. Your anger is not you. So you're able to kind of observe it and then respond instead of reacting, which I think is huge, especially from someone that is like a recovering like anger monster. So it's helped me be more grateful and be more present and then not associate with my emotions as much.
So beautiful.
So sign up, everybody.
Yeah, Ziva Online, it's where it's at. And then I'd love to hear about your experience because it was really brave, like diving in and doing this sacred sexuality work and doing pleasure prayer. But if you want to just share a little bit about your experience of this new work of like the emotional alchemy or the pleasure prayer, what you enjoyed, what felt scary, how it's impacted your relationship.
Oh my gosh. I don't even know where to begin with this. So I had the luxury of having my husband be part of the practice, which was really incredible because just seeing him be so vulnerable and really lean into everything was just, I was like, man, I really love this man so much. So I think it can be really easy to not give that appreciation when you see someone every single day and like they don't make the bed when they get up or they leave their underwear next to their bed and you're like, come on. Then when you see them in this space, in this container, you're like, wow, you are just so beautiful and I just love you so much. And it provided a depth, like a new depth to our relationship, which it's like, how deep can you go? Like, we keep testing that. So let's just keep on with that theme. But being able to express without judgment, I'm purging this, and your mom this, and your dad this, and there's no judgment. It's really like this bonding experience. And then to be in this place where you're experiencing pleasure and you're in charge of your own pleasure. It's not your partner's responsibility. And you can see my narrative almost immediately was, there's a goal I have to get to. I have to get to an orgasm, or why am I not like speeding up? Why am I feeling like I'm late or I'm slow or it's not progressing how I want? And it's this idea of control. So normally I think I would put that on him, right? Like either, come on, he's not hitting all the right spots, or he's probably anxious with me, or he wants me to hurry up and I'm giving him this dialogue that he's not giving me, and it still exists without him. So I'm able to observe that and say, nope, I don't want this. That's not the point. Just be with your body. There's no race. There is no, you're not supposed to hit certain,
like check marks,
like
a finish line.
Exactly. It's just to be present.
I really love that idea of like, oh, we think it's our partner's fault. It's easy to like just project onto them.
Yeah.
But actually, when you're in a self-pleasure practice, you're like, oh, well, there's no
It's
partner to
me.
blame. So look at me shaming myself or thinking that I'm late. And so how can I come back to the now?
And of course that stress is going to close you up. Mm-hmm. So that's all me. And then what a blessing, because now I'm in charge of healing that and being more open. And then after the whole practice last night, all of today, Erica's been like right behind me and snuggling me and nuzzling and like grabbing me and just so enamored. Like, he hasn't been like this in at least a year. We have a new baby, so we've all been tired, and sex is not on the table as often as it used to be. But I was charged and he was charged, and we have just been like just little, the little heart bubbles are everywhere, just like so in love and ready to go.
Oh my gosh, it's so sweet. It's so inspiring, because I hadn't really thought about doing this work with couples. And so this is my first time working with a couple. So it feels really exciting. And for me personally, just like hearing you both like crying tears of gratitude as if your dream had just come true was so validating and rewarding. And like why I do this work, where it's like, oh, if manifestation is about having a clear vision and feeling good, like this is one of the easiest, most beautiful, most like nature-given ways for us to get there. So thank you for your bravery.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for being a guest today on Why Isn't Everyone Doing This? I know I want to send people to your podcast, Chatting with Candice, but where else can people find you?
If you go to chattingwithcandice.com, it has all my social links, the podcast, Patreon, all that good stuff. But thank you for having me. This was amazing. Thank you for coming to North Carolina. And I just feel so honored to have gotten to know you.
Yeah, I feel like we're just getting started.
Yeah,
we got big
so
stuff to do.
Yeah.
All right, well, everyone, thank you so much for joining us on Why Isn't Everyone Doing This? So the real exciting after party is happening over at zivameditation.com/whythis, where you can find some masterclasses and some bonus content from many of our amazing guests. So thank you so much for joining us, and I'll see you over at zivameditation.com/whythis. All right, I love you, friends. See you on the next episode.